It began with the vibration of a single phone in the dead of night, 2 to 17 a.m., Ouagadougou. The air was thick, the rain heavy, and on the bedside table of Colonel Antoine Mensa, a man known in whispers as Captain Ibrahim Traoré's most trusted intelligence officer, a message appeared. It was short, urgent, and chilling emergency summit. Abidjan, 12 presidents. Topic: the Traoré problem. You were deliberately excluded. Mensa read it 3 times. His instincts told him this was no ordinary warning. Somewhere across the continent, in a luxury hotel guarded by foreign agents, Africa's most powerful men were preparing to plot in secret. And yet the target of their conspiracy, Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, was about to turn their secrecy into the greatest stage of their humiliation. Why did 12 leaders, many backed by France, feel so threatened by one young officer? Why did they believe his ideas about sovereignty, transparency, and dignity were so dangerous that they required a coordinated plan of isolation, destabilization, and even military intervention? And most of all, what did they fear more, the man himself or the truth he represented? As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the world had no idea that history was shifting. Within hours, Traoré would reveal that he had not only known of their secret gathering, he had heard every word spoken in that room. What was meant to be his downfall would instead become the downfall of an entire corrupt order. Brothers and sisters, lovers of Africa, this is not a story of shadows. It is the story of light breaking through, a tale of one man and one truth standing against 12 leaders and a system decades in the making. Stay with us, because what happened in Abidjan was more than a conspiracy, it was a turning point for Africa. Please share this video if you believe President Ibrahim Traoré's courage deserves to be remembered. And subscribe if you believe the truth is always more important than the headlines. The morning air in Abidjan carried no hint of the storm about to erupt. Behind the polished glass of a 5-star hotel, 12 presidents' men who styled themselves as guardians of stability filed into a conference room under the tightest security the French embassy could provide. Local staff had been dismissed and replaced with personnel flown in from Paris. Outside, the streets looked calm, but the walls inside were heavy with suspicion. They were here for one reason only: the Traoré problem. President Alassane Dramane of Ivory Coast, the convener of the gathering, wasted no time. At exactly 10:00 a.m., he opened the summit with words that would have sent a chill down any listener. Gentlemen, we face an existential threat to the stability we have built for decades. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's populist rhetoric and reckless policies threaten not only Burkina Faso, but the foundations of all our nations. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed unease. Around the long mahogany table, nods of agreement followed. Jean-Baptiste Soro of Gabon, who had clung to power for 15 years through elections few believed, leaned forward. My youth are wearing Traoré t-shirts. They chant his name in our streets. His ideas are spreading like a virus. If we don't act, we will all face the same fate: exposed, embarrassed, and abandoned. What he meant was clear. Traoré had done more than govern his own nation differently. By rejecting exploitative mining contracts, renegotiating trade deals, and speaking openly of African dignity, he had made other leaders look like puppets. The contrast was damning. His popularity among the young was terrifying. Then came the voice of Mohamed al-Bashir of Chad. He's made us all look like French servants. My generals ask me why we can't stand like he does. He is destroying 50 years of carefully managed relationships with Paris. This cannot continue. As the words filled the room, a French intelligence officer slipped quietly past the doorway. His presence was no accident. Though the presidents called the meeting African Unity, the fingerprints of Paris were everywhere: extra guards, intelligence briefings, even the agenda itself. France wanted Traoré silenced as much as they did. What the 12 didn't know was that their secrecy was an illusion. 3 separate streams of information were flowing out of the room in real time: a waiter with a hidden transmitter, a technician who had wired the microphones during maintenance, and most shocking of all, one of the presidents himself. That man was Thomas Kabade of Guinea-Bissau, a young reformist trapped in old structures. He had reached out to Traoré months earlier, convinced that the Burkina leaders' fight for sovereignty was the only path forward. As the hours passed, the discussions darkened. President Ram presented a 5-phase plan, each step more severe than the last. First, economic isolation: borders closed, trade disrupted, chaos manufactured. Second, diplomatic exclusion: suspension from ECOWAS and the African Union, cloaked under the excuse of democratic backsliding. Third, military intimidation joint exercises staged on Burkina Faso's borders to provoke fear. Fourth, internal destabilization, funneling money to opposition parties, stirring unrest, even encouraging dissent inside the Burkinabe army. And if all else failed, Phase 5 international intervention, a polite phrase for French boots on Burkinabe soil. Not every man was comfortable. Ahmed Nadi of Senegal raised a hand. This could backfire. His support among the people is deep. Acting too harshly may make martyrs of him. But President Ram dismissed the warning. Popular support is temporary. Hunger lasts longer. When his economy collapses, his people will abandon him. Then Morocco's envoy added fuel to the fire. Though the king had not come in person, his minister made it clear his rhetoric threatens us as well. Republican movements in North Africa whisper his name. He must be stopped. By late afternoon, the conspirators signed what they called the Abidjan Accord, a commitment to coordinated action against Ibrahim Traoré. Each signature was meant to protect a regime, to preserve a privilege to shield fortunes amassed in Parisian bank accounts. They believed they had contained the danger. But as the ink dried on their secret pact, something remarkable was already happening hundreds of miles away in Ouagadougou. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm as ever, was receiving word-for-word transcripts of every line they spoke. The men who thought themselves untouchable were in truth performing on a stage they did not know existed. The conspirators left Abidjan with confidence. They had signed their accord, drafted their plan, and congratulated themselves for defending African stability. What they didn't know was that the true stage had only just been set. Within an hour of the summit's closing, while their planes idled on the tarmac, Ibrahim Traoré stood before the press in Ouagadougou holding a thick folder in his hands. The room buzzed with reporters. Cameras clicked, recorders flashed, and the captain spoke without preamble. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 48 hours, 12 presidents met in Abidjan to discuss what they call the Traoré problem. I was not invited, but I did not need to be. I heard every word. The silence that followed was electric. Journalists leaned forward, stunned. Traoré opened the folder and began to read. First, President Ram's declaration, "We face an existential threat." Then Soro's lament about young people wearing Traoré t-shirts. Then, the chilling confession, France pays me personally $5 million a year to host their base. Each line struck like thunder. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled to call their editors. International networks cut into their programming. This was no ordinary press conference. It was a live unmasking of Africa's most entrenched corruption. Traoré's tone hardened. President José Silva of Equatorial Guinea boasted of 17 houses in Paris. He was right. And I call it what it is: treason. Any leader who enriches himself while his people live in shacks is not a president. He is a thief. Then he turned to the cameras, his voice cold, almost surgical. They thought they were meeting in secret. They believed their French-trained security was impenetrable. They assumed African intelligence was amateur. Gentlemen, I was listening as you spoke. Every word, every plan, every betrayal. Behind him, aides wheeled in boxes. Inside were financial records, wire transfers, signed agreements. Traoré held them up one by one. Here are the accounts. Here are the payments. Here is the plan for military intervention drafted with French letterhead. The evidence was undeniable. But the climax wasn't only about exposure, it was about response. Traoré announced immediate measures. Burkina Faso would close its borders to the 12 nations involved, not to punish their people, but to shield Burkinabe citizens from leaders' treachery. Effective immediately, Burkina Faso was withdrawing from ECOWAS. An organization that plots against its own members has lost its legitimacy. All French advisors, intelligence officers, and military staff were given 72 hours to leave. Most dramatically, he called for an African People's Summit, not of presidents, but of youth unions, women's groups, civil society. The real Africa will meet not in secret, but in the open. The reactions were volcanic. In Dakar, protests ignited within hours as Senegalese youth demanded President Nadi's resignation. In Libreville, military officers whispered of reviewing Soro's rule, an unmistakable threat of a coup. In N'Djamena, revelations about toxic waste dumping for cash sparked outrage. Ministers resigned rather than defend the indefensible. One man stood out: President Thomas Kabade of Guinea-Bissau, the hidden ally. Forced into the open by Traoré's acknowledgement, he faced the cameras in his own capital. Yes, I attended the summit. Yes, I reported to Captain Traoré. And yes, I would do it again. I chose sovereignty over servitude. If that makes me a traitor to the corrupt, I accept it with pride. Crowds flooded the streets to cheer him. What had been a risk to his career became his coronation as a hero among Africa's youth. The French government panicked. Paris issued statements denying involvement, but Traoré had saved the most devastating blow for last emails from French intelligence payments from oil companies and even signed military contingency plans. When video of these documents spread online, opposition parties in France demanded investigations. Their colonial veil was torn away. Social media exploded. The hashtag #12 traitors trended across the continent. Memes mocked the presidents who had plotted in secret while Traoré watched them live. In villages with only one television, people gathered to witness the revelations. Students in universities from Cairo to Cape Town filled lecture halls to stream the press conference. For the first time in decades, millions felt that history was unfolding not in Paris, London, or Washington, but in Ouagadougou. The 12 who had believed they were untouchable now faced something far greater than sanctions or coups. They faced exposure, and in a continent long starved of transparency that was more lethal than any weapon. The morning after Traoré's press conference, Africa woke up different. In city streets, dusty villages, and university campuses, the whispers of conspiracy had become a roar of indignation. What the 12 presidents had signed in secret was now public knowledge, and their people demanded answers. In Dakar, tens of thousands marched silently, holding up photocopies of the bank transfers Traoré had exposed. Mothers carried placards reading, "Our children die in hospitals, while our leaders live in Paris mansions." The silence was haunting, an indictment more powerful than any slogan. Within days, Senegal's president faced mass resignations in his cabinet. In Libreville, Gabon, military units refused to disperse protesters. Instead, officers declared neutrality, effectively withdrawing protection from President Soro. By midnight, he had fled the palace. His fall, once unthinkable, was cheered as proof that no ruler could outlast the truth. Chad erupted with fury after Traoré revealed $15 million had been paid to allow toxic waste dumping in the desert, poisoning water and children. Women led marches demanding justice, waving photographs of deformed infants. The Minister of Health resigned on live television. When President al-Bashir ordered the army to restore order, his generals refused. "We serve the people of Chad, not Chad's thieves," one commander declared, placing the president under house arrest. Meanwhile, in Guinea-Bissau, the story was different. President Kabade, once seen as weak and compromised, emerged from the shadows, transformed. By openly admitting his role as Traoré's ally, he turned shame into strength. His people poured into the streets, chanting his name, demanding reforms he had long hesitated to attempt. Kabade responded swiftly, expelling French advisors, revising mining contracts, and inviting civil society groups into the palace for consultations. He became, in effect, Traoré's first true partner in a new model of governance. The ripple effects went beyond individuals. The African Union, thrown into crisis, convened an emergency session. Chairperson Moussa Faki admitted publicly, "The revelations of Ouagadougou cannot be ignored. The credibility of our institutions is at stake." For the first time, the AU debated suspending not a military junta or a coup regime, but democratically elected presidents accused of selling their nations for personal gain. Civil society movements seized the moment. Youth groups organized continent-wide demonstrations under the banner "Harden West Stand with Traoré." From Lagos to Nairobi, from Johannesburg to Bamako, millions filled the streets, not only in support of Burkina Faso, but against corruption and neo-colonialism everywhere. Women's associations, often sidelined in political life, led some of the largest marches, arguing that corruption had robbed families of schools, hospitals, and clean water for decades. The economic consequences came quickly. The 12 presidents had intended to isolate Burkina Faso, but the opposite occurred. Investors saw opportunity in transparency. In just 1 week, Burkina Faso received more than double the foreign inquiries it had the entire previous year. Sovereign wealth funds from Asia, clean energy firms from Europe, and African entrepreneurs themselves reached out. The message was clear: corruption was risk, but honesty was good business. By contrast, the economies of the 12 began to wobble. Foreign investors fled, fearing unrest and instability. 3 countries saw their currencies plunge. Civil servants in Benin went on strike after learning their leaders had received personal payments while salaries went unpaid. Opposition parties in Togo and Cameroon gained new momentum, promising to follow Burkina Faso's model of renegotiating contracts and publishing government accounts. The political fallout was devastating. Within a month, 3 of the 12 presidents had been forced from office too by coups won by resignation. Others clung to power, but with authority drained. Cabinets fractured, legislatures rebelled, and churches, mosques, and traditional elders condemned the corruption revealed. For ordinary citizens, the effect was psychological as much as political. For the first time in living memory, many Africans saw that secret deals could be exposed, that leaders could be held accountable, and that sovereignty was not an impossible dream. Traoré's defiance had not just protected Burkina Faso, it had cracked open the door for a continental awakening. When the Abidjan conspiracy burst into the open, the tremors were not confined to Africa. In Paris, Washington, Moscow, and Beijing diplomats scrambled to understand what had just happened. For decades, Western capitals had assumed that African leaders would whisper in backrooms, sign secret contracts, and keep their people in the dark. Now, a young captain had turned that assumption upside down. France was hit the hardest. For months, their intelligence officers had cultivated the 12 presidents, supplying them with security details, military advisors, and quiet financial transfers. Now, those same documents signed with French letterhead were splashed across global television screens. Opposition parties in Paris accused the government of neo-colonial criminality. Protesters marched outside the National Assembly holding signs that read, "Not in our name." The Élysée scrambled to deny involvement, but the evidence was too overwhelming. France recalled ambassadors ordered emergency reviews of its African bases and faced an uncomfortable truth: the empire's last strings of control had been exposed. Other European powers watched with mixed emotions. Some saw opportunity. If Africa demanded fairer trade, Europe might negotiate new deals built on transparency. Others feared the loss of cheap resources and easy contracts. In Berlin, one minister admitted candidly, "We built our industries on Africa's silence." That silence has ended. The United States took a different path. Washington had long criticized France's heavy-handed policies in Africa, and Traoré's revelations gave American diplomats a chance to position themselves differently. Within a week, a special envoy landed in Ouagadougou. The message was clear: the U.S. recognized Burkina Faso's sovereignty and sought partnership, not patronage. American businesses saw opportunity in stability through transparency. Energy companies and technology firms quietly began exploring deals fairer than France's, but still motivated by interest. The State Department briefings stressed caution. America wanted to be seen as supporting reform, not controlling it. Russia and China also moved quickly. Moscow offered military cooperation, promising weapons without conditions. Beijing extended investment proposals for infrastructure, hinting at billions in loans. But Traoré's response was measured. He accepted partnerships only on transparent terms. "We will not trade one master for another," he said. It was a subtle warning. Burkina Faso welcomed allies but not overlords. The global media landscape lit up. CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera ran non-stop coverage while African diaspora networks amplified every revelation. The hashtag #NaDyo12 traitors trended not just in Africa, but in London, New York, and Toronto. For many in the diaspora, the scandal confirmed what they had long suspected: that corruption in Africa was not just homegrown, but systematically fed by foreign powers. Think tanks in Washington and Brussels began writing papers with titles like The Traoré Doctrine and Transparency as Geopolitics. Analysts debated whether this was a turning point, and Africa no longer content to be carved up in secret. In universities, professors compared Traoré's defiance to earlier moments of global rupture: Gandhi's Salt March, Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal, Mandela's release. But the most powerful reactions came not from governments, but from ordinary citizens around the world. In Latin America, activists drew parallels to their own struggles against corruption and dependency. In Asia, newspapers asked whether similar exposure could shake their entrenched elites. Across social media, one phrase echoed again and again: "If Africa can do this, why not us?" For the United States, the moment was sobering. Here was proof that moral authority, transparency, dignity, sovereignty could achieve what armies and sanctions could not. For France, it was humiliation. For Russia and China, it was both challenge and opportunity. And for the world at large, it was a reminder that history's great shifts often begin not in superpower capitals, but in unexpected places. Ouagadougou had just joined that list. History often disguises itself in unexpected moments. For Africa, the great unmasking came not through war or invasion, but through a press conference in Ouagadougou. What began as a secret summit in Abidjan ended as the most public humiliation in modern African politics. 12 presidents once untouchable found their fortunes collapsing not under the weight of armies, but under the power of truth. The lesson was unmistakable in the digital age. There are no secrets sturdy enough to protect corruption. Hidden bank transfers can be revealed. Signed military plans can be broadcast to millions. And leaders who thought themselves secure in their palaces can find their people standing outside in silence, holding printed documents as proof of betrayal. But beyond the spectacle lies the warning. What happened in Abidjan was not just about 12 men or one captain. It was about a system that has for decades thrived on secrecy, dependency, and exploitation. That system is global. It stretches from French oil companies in Africa to financial institutions in Europe and North America. And while it may have been shaken, it has not disappeared. For every corrupt deal exposed, another waits in the shadows. The challenge now falls not only on President Ibrahim Traoré or Burkina Faso, but on an entire continent, and on all of us who watch from afar. Can Africa sustain transparency as a principle, not just as a moment? Can the people newly awakened keep their leaders accountable year after year, long after the hashtags fade? And can the world's great powers accept a partnership of equals, rather than one of exploitation? For our viewers in America, especially those over 60 who have seen history repeat itself in cycles, this moment may feel familiar. You have lived through the fall of empires, the civil rights struggles, the scandals that toppled governments. You know that truth always arrives even if delayed, and that when it comes, it demands courage to act upon. The same is true now for Africa. So I leave you with questions. Do you think that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly effective, yet can we continue to trust him to carry this torch of sovereignty, or should someone else succeed him when the time comes? And more importantly, do you believe Africa's awakening can survive the backlash of those who still profit from its silence? Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness and support President Ibrahim Traoré's stand for sovereignty. Subscribe if you believe, as we do, that the truth is always more important than the headlines. Because in the end, the Abidjan summit was not about one man's problem. It was about an entire generation's solution.